Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for coming out on this rainy Saturday afternoon. I'm Bill Arning. I'm the director here at the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, and it's been really my great pleasure to welcome the Galveston Artist Residency to take over our downstairs gallery and give a mount an exhibition that's not only a history of what's an extraordinary startup program here in Texas, but also feels to me like a meditation on what residencies can do, what the point of going away to a place as unusual as Galveston is, what the nature of Galveston and its relationship to Houston is. When we had our discussions leading up to the show, all of these subjects were fair game, and we kept bouncing around them. I'm just going to give a little history. Was that my first taste of Texas was when the Blaffer Art Museum invited me to jury their Houston area show. And they were gonna drive me around for several days and visit studios. And I remember the day we went down to Galveston was a giant fraternity party, and the entire seawall was covered with people dancing on their car hoods and like stopping traffic and doing, I guess it was before that sort of New Orleans style bump had gotten popular, but people were dancing on their cars that way. So that was my introduction to Galveston, was this giant party going on. And then I went to visit Eric Schnell, who's went on to found the Residency as an artist. And it was this kind of strange, magical afternoon where I got to wonder how he had, and hear the story of how he had ended up there. So that was a very important part for me. So when I learned that Eric was doing the residency, I immediately wanted to see what the results were. And I remember going down for the opening party and realizing this was a really special place. The band Indian Jewelry, who I loved already, were performing, and there was a vibe amongst the artists and supporters of Galveston that was really extraordinary. And people do a sort of work there that I don't see being done in other places, in other types of places. I think most of you were downstairs for Autumn Night's performance, which is good. She's going to do another performance here on 1 p.m. on January 30th, which is on Saturday also. I don't know if it's the same piece or a different piece. But there's something extraordinary about that. So we're going to ask the artists to sort of introduce themselves and just give a sort of brief overview of why they wanted to go to Galveston and what their experience were there. And then we're going to open up to a discussion. So thank you for coming. And you're going to go first.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kelly Sears. I was one of the inaugural artists at the Galveston Artist Residency during the first year. I had been to Galveston once before, and all I remember were Ike high water lines, and it was sun was setting, but I just remembered that fact about it, and boarded up windows. And when the invitation came to spend some time down there, I think it was with a conversation I had with Eric, and you recommended this book, Isaac's Storm, which is a book that chronicles the most deadly hurricane in our nation's history, which happened in Galveston in 1900. And so that weird conflating of an event from 1900 and an event from 2008, which was the impetus for the start of this residency. Normally when there's disasters, there's a very predatory economy that pops up around it. And so it's nice to think about there's a disaster that instead of, hopefully we weren't predatory on the island, but going there and really falling in love with, living off the mainland of the United States, and walking and seeing all these moments of history. The building that we live in is from turn of the century, but seeing all these then walking to our brand new studios, which are state of the art and just immaculate and brand new and shiny. So for me, I really thought about collapsing of time, and time as a collage there in these very in-between spaces between past and present while being on the island.
Hi, my name is Colin Hunt. I was the guinea pig to this whole experiment. I was the first resident, and actually when I was there for the summer, the building wasn't even finished yet. And I think kind of what was surprising for me about coming to Galveston in that I'd never been there before I came as a resident, was that I didn't know what the landscape was going to be like at all. And what I ended up sort of indexing on, or the thing that kind of took over when I arrived there, was just this feeling of a little bit what you were talking about, Kelly, was the feeling of the place, and that this is a place that's suffered great loss, and the residency was about kind of building something out of that rubble. And I felt like my experience and the work that I was sort of making and thinking about at that very incredibly particular point in my own life mirrored what was happening at the residency, and the fact that the work I was making and the residency itself as a structure were kind of growing out of the same place and the same feeling emotionally. And I was kind of blown away by that. And I thought it was really optimistic. So yeah, that was my kind of inaugural moment there.
Okay. Hi, I'm Joe Orangias, and I was a third-year resident, 2013 to 14. And I had never been to Texas before coming to GAR, but I had recently finished graduate school and was kind of looking for a long-term residency where I could really kind of explore further kind of different methods of making work about place and people. So I think I was really kind of excited when I arrived because it's such a beautiful place, and GAR was such a supportive environment. And yeah, I was kind of blown away by how rich the culture was there and how many different kind of communities were there and how vibrant they were. So yeah, I kind of approached the island looking at the history, the social history of the island, and studying monuments and landmarks. And I ended up working with the local queer community and made the Pink Dolphin Monument, which is a monument for LGBT communities.
And there's a picture of it on the banner outside. It will be in the catalog, but there's a picture on the banner outside.
Right. Yeah. So it's in on East Beach in the pavilion there, and yeah. So it was kind of an interesting way to work with people and get to know a place through my work. So I think GAR was very accommodating, and kind of letting each artist, kind of approach it in their own way, and learn about this place in a different way, and kind of share that with, the local public and now Houston. So.
Hi, I'm Hilary Wilder, and I finished the residency just this past summer, so I guess I'm the most recent of all of us, new alum. So I guess my relationship to Galveston is maybe a little bit different, because I think maybe I lived in Texas before the residency longer than anyone else, because I lived here in Houston for 5 years. Ages ago, it feels like. So I guess I felt like I knew Galveston a little bit, having visited there, and I've shown at the Galveston Arts Center. But I was really surprised by how much I didn't know and how much I sort of fell in love with when I was there. I knew about the complicated history of the island and the storms, and I've made work in the past about different locations and about sort of romanticizing different places. So I think some people felt like that was a really natural fit for me. But what I was more impacted by when I was there was just all the weird stuff that makes Galveston, Galveston. People who have spent time there probably know Bob's Grocery, which is a real important site for me. And actually, I remember texting someone after I left Galveston, because I was at the Kroger where I live in Richmond. And I was like, I'm at the Kroger, there are no crazy people here. So there are things about Galveston where, of course, I'm very sensitive to the history, and I think there are interesting collisions of aesthetics, and that's what my paintings are about that I've made in this series. But I think there's also getting to know different ways that people live there in a sort of an authentic way, and having time to really embed yourself in a place for a year, which you don't typically get to do on most artist residencies, where you're sort of in and out as a tourist really quickly. So I feel like Galveston is a place that I'll always be returning to in my work. And as other people have already touched on, it's just such an amazing opportunity to have the time and these beautiful studios and the support of our visionary director, And yeah, and just to know that there are people in the community there that are excited about what's happening at the residency. So I was actually talking to somebody about it last night, and I got kind of choked up like a dork, you know. I was just like, it was amazing, you know. So I have nothing but really fond feelings about Galveston and about the residency.
And Eric, would you be able to tell a little bit about how the founding of the residency, where it goes in your biography as a person and as an artist, and as in terms of your larger vision of how you are in the world?
Yeah, maybe. I was living in Brooklyn when a friend of mine called me, and he was needing to go away. He was living in Galveston, and he asked me if I'd take care of his dog for 2 months. And my landlord had just come by and asked me if I could pay more rent. And so I said yes, and I went, and I took care of his dog, and he never came back from India. And I stayed I've been in Galveston ever since, and I really love it there. It was Bert Geary, who isn't here tonight. He's probably somewhere in Big Bend right now. I think he lost his phone the other day. He's probably trying to catch a mountain lion, I'm guessing, or a bear. He could come wandering in at any moment, but he's an old friend of mine, a dear friend, and it was after Hurricane Ike. We had been kind of sharing this space. We had this kind of common space that we were both using, and it got destroyed by Ike. And we were both kind of just scratching our heads, going like, well, what do we do? Like, what do we want to do? And we were hiking around in West Texas, and we both kind of had this moment where it was like, well, we want to do something in Galveston. And it seemed like there was so much destruction that we really wanted to do something about new creation. And somehow everything lined up where we were just completely, in agreement. And it just happened. It wasn't, I don't feel like there was any really big accomplishments, except that, everything just worked out, so it was cool. It's just really, it's kind of intense for me because I'm not used to seeing like everybody, like it was so cool that everybody came in for it, like the artists from all 5 years. So it's really cool. And I'm really grateful for Bill. I mean, he's been really close to the project from the beginning and supportive. And he's actually, we're the future home of the Bill Arning Memorial Library. He's going to give us all his books. Of course, anyway, that's all. That shouldn't happen for a long time.
And who knows how many art books are going to be by the end. It's like you might need to build a whole nother building for it.
We're going to do some fundraising for the library soon, so you can give me your name and number if you have some money to pitch in. No, but obviously, I feel really lucky to have been a part of this project, and I do see my role with GAR is to be something of a facilitator, which, people who know me know that I'm an artist at heart. So it feels funny for me to wear these hats of director or curator, but I do it because I love the project.
Yeah. But somehow, when I think about your work, and I've known your work since a long time ago in New York, there's something about gathering together that is so crucial to your aesthetic. So when I think about GAR, it's kind of this gathering together of really uniquely eccentric creative visionaries that it's like somehow all together in this, like as a almost meta artwork, or and when I look at the dynamics between the residents each time, and I see them because they come to all the CAMH events, and I see them gel, and I see that first week of the residency when they don't really know each other yet, and they're trying to figure out each other out, and they arrive together because there's usually only one car, and they all arrive together, and you can tell they don't really know who each other are yet, and then the way that changes over time. How do you see the mixing, and also the artist can comment on this too, except for you because you were on your own, you didn't have fellows when you were here, about the dynamic and what it does to the creative juices by having other people around you?
Does anybody want to try that?
I would say that something that's really unique about this is that we all lived on the same hall of an apartment building, and it was almost had a sitcom kind of feel to it, I would just pop across. Nick lived across the hall from me, and I would just kind of pop in. And then we all then had that mirrored structure in the studios. So, you know, I've done a series of residencies, and you always have this place where you can kind of retreat to, but there was always this, even, it felt like there's a sense of a collectivity the entire time while there. And I think that's really important. You know, at the core, you know, I was a core fellow before there. I had my apartment, I would go there, I had my studio, and that's when it felt really collective. But at the GAR, you're always like kind of within a proximity of people who have come to the island together. You're living there, you're making work there, and you're always very close to this community.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, the closeness was a major part of it, and especially because everyone comes from such different backgrounds and has lived, you know, all over the world and done other residencies or, you know, studied in different places. So it created really kind of an amazing dialogue and diversity within the small community. And I think that's really visible downstairs between, you know, every artist who's been there. So I think, yeah, there were really amazing conversations, and I think they grew over time. And it was, yeah, it was also nice. Autumn was in my year who performed downstairs, and so she had a link to Houston. So, you know, I learned a lot about Houston through those conversations as well. So.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that I think what's really one of the many great qualities about GAR is that it's so, there's so much latitude for it to be self-directed too. Like there were certain times when I had to just be in the studio because I had deadlines, and so there wasn't any expectation that I had to be a part of the group if I had something I had to be doing, right? So I thought that was really nice too, that everyone had could make their own decisions about how to spend their time and where to spend their time. And everyone's on a different schedule my year, you know, so that was the funny thing too, is like this funny timeshare of like who's there late at night and who's there first thing in the morning. And so I thought that was really great that we each got to be our own artists and make our own decisions about that as well.
I was just going to jump in and say something in relation to what you were saying, Bill, to Eric, and about that sort of kind of eclectic eccentricity of his work and sort of pulling this, all these disparate things together. And I would say that I felt that way about Galveston itself as an island, and that it's a place where that just happens naturally, and that it was very normalizing to arrive there and to see that and to feel that. And I remember we had this one experience where we were sitting outside late at night, and an owl flew down the middle of the main street, you know, like between the cars. And this was like just an everyday thing there. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh yeah, in Galveston, this is normal. And I feel like that's kind of how the whole place is. And you can kind of just feed off of that. And it's part of your work, but it's also just part of your life. And those things kind of blur, and those boundaries blur in ways that in other places, it's a little bit more compartmentalized.
No, but there's got to be challenges too, as being on an island. It's a relatively small center, like just in terms of getting art supplies, or what are the biggest challenges of trying to get around in Galveston and trying to get stuff done? And actually, Eric, you can start that since you deal with logistics there all the time. What's the weirdest thing any artist has said, I need this, and where can I get it?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm not sure. I think these days most people just order everything. We have the UPS guy and the FedEx guy are just marching through our spaces constantly. You know, it is tricky. I mean, there's challenges to, it's kind of small town life, which I think, you know, can be challenging. Like everybody knows everybody, and it can, you know, it's a small town. So it has those limitations. But we are so close to Houston, you know. I feel like that's the thing. Like that's the thing. If you want to, we're not that isolated. If you want to come to Houston and come to the CAM and hit the museums, you're an hour away, you know. It's like, that's the beauty, I think, of Galveston, is you can go over the causeway and disappear, but if you want to come here and, you know, really throw yourself into Houston, you can pretty easily, you know. So like the artists that are here this year, like I think they come to everything that happens in Houston, yeah. You know, and that's the cool. I mean, I think with GAR, we try not to direct that so much. Like if somebody wants to go and be in their studio for a year, great. You know, like if we pick you to come and do this thing, we're supporting you to find the path, you know. But if you need that sort of dialogue and you want to come to Houston every weekend and come to the talks and the film screenings and the openings, like, great, you know. So I feel like it's basically about trust. Like, you know, we trust that like you're going to find a way to make your work And you know, that's it. It's like, it's sort of, that, we tried not to be conditional with that. Of course, people tend to have flaws, and you know, you get into weird things, but it's, nobody's perfect, but we do try, I think, or somewhat.
No, but how, I've seen a lot of projects there where people have used the unique narrative history of Galveston as part of the work. But is there a sense of them actually sort of becoming parts of the community or meeting people who are not strictly involved in the arts? I'm hearing, you know, the story about the supermarket, whether or not you've actually befriended any of the crazy people at Bob's Supermarket. What are the other stories about how you, about getting out of the residency and into the community there?
Just real quick, one of the things that for us, I feel like we've had really great fun and success interacting with like the science community, I think, in Galveston. And like the project we're working on right now with Vicky, who's here today, the photographer's a collaboration with a scientist from NOAA, Christopher Benson. And we've just, you know, I feel like that's been a really important, because the co-founder of GAR, Bert Geary, is a biologist by training. And so I feel like it's sort of hardwired a little into the way we think, is that if I can ever find a way to connect art and science, or really, I mean, I think Sally's been a big part of helping me think of ways, like I think we really like it when we can connect art with another discipline, so we can learn something that we don't already know. I mean, right, so I mean, that's a big part of what we do. It's like whenever we can find kind of a pathway into, and we've done art and magic with Jesse Bransford, and art and science with Christopher Benson. Autumn Night collaborated on The Ghost of Robert Rauschenberg, which was with DeCamera of Houston. You know, so I feel like we're constantly looking for these ways to like build these relationships, and you know, when they seem to fit, and I feel like we're looking for that as much as we can. But.
Were there other residencies you were looking at or models when you were trying to found this thing?
The only residency I ever did was I was in New York for ISCP a few years, maybe in 2006, and the one thing that I learned was I knew it had to be longer than 6 months, because I did a 6-month residency and I was just feeling like I was getting some momentum, and they told me I had to like paint my walls and go home. And so I was talking to Joe Hobble over at the core program, and that was one thing he was helping me sort of figure some things out. And we decided it should probably be a year, because that's enough time to make a body of work if you put your mind to it. Anything less than that to me feels like you kind of have to go in with a preconceived idea of what you're going to make and produce it, which can be really cool. But I wanted to be a place for new creation, where you could maybe come there and like crash and burn 3 or 4 times, and then like after the new year make something new. You know, that's sort of, so that was sort of the pacing of it, how it was built.
Yeah. I've just, I got to see the Black Mountain College History Show at the ICA Boston last Thursday, and I started reading all the catalog texts, and it talked about these group of geniuses arriving and being in the middle of rural North Carolina in Asheville, and how they did sort of everything. Like they had, farming communes, and they were like building furniture because the cots they had arrived at really weren't the best. And then they started weaving clothes because they hadn't packed the right things. And I'm like, I suddenly was picturing like, but then there was also this incredible free-form collaboration with the poets and the scientists and all these things together. And so I was thinking like, yeah, that's kind of like, the big version of GAR, where that they're doing it yourself. Now, did you end up making things that you otherwise might not have made? Hilary, since I know your trajectory as an artist, sort of, what did you make there that you otherwise would not have made?
Well, you were just saying something about, or maybe Eric was, about having like time to sort of make some mistakes and then get going after the new year, and that's exactly what I did. So I spent the first few months making terrible paintings, just because, like when you're sort of chasing deadlines for shows, or you're busy, like I have a teaching job, and so I have to worry about making things that are showable, like in certain amounts of time. And when I first got to Galveston, I finished something that had to be shipped out, and then I was like, I can do whatever I want. And ooh, it was bad, but in the best sense, right? Because I made all these canvases and just like tried every idea that I was thinking about, and that was so useful to me to be able to do like that kind of like sort of productive play in the studio. And so like the paintings that I'm making now, like one of which is downstairs, that have like these sort of multi-form, like different windows, you know, that comes from being able to do that and to experiment in how to sort of say the same thing in different ways, and finding that there is like sort of no one way to describe place or make a picture of place. So those sort of composite paintings that I think also sort of look a little bit like windows on a screen, that's about like finding different ways to say the same thing, and I never could have done that without having that extra time built in, and having that time to experiment. And also, you know, another piece downstairs is this paper chair, and I was just sort of playing with the idea of making painted paper folded furniture when I first got to Galveston. So that for me was a learning curve, and if I hadn't, again, had the time, it wouldn't have worked out the way it did.
How did that work with you, Kelly?
Well, I'd like to implicate Eric in this and Sally as well, because it's really one of the most supportive spaces I've been in, and the kind of the message you get or the vibration you get is to try any weird thing you want, it can happen. And so for me, it was nice to be so close in terms of walking, and I collected a lot of things from the island. So the images for the piece, I made a new piece for the show because my recent work would not have fit in with a larger idea of island time. It was way too frenetic and aggressive, and that's not how I would think of Galveston. So for me, it was just kind of sourcing things very locally from there. So our apartment was 2 doors down from a used bookstore. So most of the images, and I tried a bunch of things, and I'd like to echo Hilary and say that failing is really the most, you learn so much from failing when making art. So I'd collected these images and I'd worked with them, and they'd been failing. And it was nice to have this reason to maybe revisit them to make this piece. But something else I did at GAR while I was there was I hosted an event called Feast Dream. And it was an event in 3 parts. It was one part food menu, and I collaborated with Benji Mason and Richard Knight, local Houston chefs. Then there was a film component of it, and the food was all biochemically designed to trigger very vivid dreams. The film program also likewise was paired with the food, and the third part of the evening that we would all collectively do is everyone left with a postcard. What? No, not roofies. But there was, they actually brought the bartender down and made Valerian cocktails. And then everyone left with a postcard, and you're supposed to keep it on your bedside table and write down your dreams. And we made a archive of everyone's kind of subconscious experiences. And Eric was like, yeah, do that. That's, so he's kind of an enabler for any bizarre tendency that you want to nurture while you're down there. And that happens so rarely in life.
Yeah. Well, and I also think about all the different disciplines you've had there, from someone like Autumn who does mainly performance or performance via video to someone like Colin where it's really a painting practice. Have you, now with the 5th group of artists starting this season and being very active already, have you thought about whether the parameters are good as is, whether you want to expand it, whether you want to, if a chef wants to apply or a poet, have you thought about other ways that that you'd like to see happen over the next 5 years?
Yeah, we've talked about that, and when we originally started, I think that was sort of the idea to maybe cross over into other disciplines a little more. But I actually think it's nice having a focus. Like by being focused on visual art primarily, and then kind of branching into these other things, I think it's pretty healthy. And to me, it feels like the right scale for Galveston. So I'm happy with it. I think it feels really good in terms of where it's at and the scale of it. And in case I forget, one thing I just wanted to say, because I know I'll forget to do this, because I think people think of residencies and they always kind of think of them as it is like, it's always like kind of sold as like a gift of time to the artist. But I think the thing for me that's important to say is that I also think it's really good to appreciate that the artists give their time to this place. You know, and it's a year of your life, which is significant. And so, I mean, I feel like that's something that sometimes you have to think about. If somebody is willing to throw themselves into this like weird small place that maybe isn't like the center of the art world for a year, that's a kind of gift they're giving to a community. And you know, you don't hear about that as much, but I think it's really valuable. You know, because there's a kind of daring in that. Like some artists can't do that. Like, you know, they want to be like where people can do things for them. But these artists are willing to go to a place where they're giving a new voice to a place, which I think is, I don't know, I just wanted to make sure I got that out there, because I feel like that's something I don't say it enough, but I think it's important.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I get a lot of calls from artists in other parts of the world that have looked at Galveston Artist Residency online, and they call me going, you know, I know you're involved with this space, and I ask them where they are in their trajectories,
Right.
What do they need to do next, and if it's really about getting David Zwirner into their studio, that's not really the right move for it.
Right.
But if there's this certain plateau point which people hit when they get a certain level of something, but they don't know what the next thing is and they need the time for it, that there's a really right period to do a residency like this. There are, you know, like ones like the ICP where you get 6 months in an art center, and that's quite a different thing. Central Track in Dallas, which is an interesting one, has been doing really interesting things because they have focused on symposium and getting all these sort of thinkers through. I'm looking at all the different ways. I'm on the board of Fire Island Art Residency, which is the LGBTQ art residency in Fire Island, which has pluses and minuses. The minuses is that the studios really aren't studios in any normal sense of the word. They're kind of like rooms with a bed. What happens is people go there and they start making work that's totally different than what they've made before because they don't have the physical space to do it. I walked in and there's a painter, I was doing crits out there named Baker Overstreet I liked. And I was so excited I was going to see his new paintings. And I walk in, and I'm like, Baker, where are the paintings? And he's like, I'm making puppets. And he starts pulling out hand puppets. So I kind of love that about residencies. What was the experience like of when your time was up and you were suddenly re-entering a more normal reality? I mean, because JoJo left there and went to New Zealand, so that was kind of like an extreme response. What was the feeling of leaving like?
I guess, yeah, because it did feel like time slowed down there. So I guess, and you know, I guess I stayed very busy and kind of always working in the studio and working did a bunch of collaborations with different people. But I feel like at the end, I felt like a lot of pressure because this time was running out. So I kind of was like really trying to finish everything and get ready for the next place. But yeah, I also thought that it was like a nice start to a bunch of projects. And in New Zealand, I kind of continued some research I started in Galveston, and you know, I still have a couple projects going on from that time. So yeah, in a way, it's kind of continued. Although there was this kind of abrupt end, and for me, like a drastic change in scenery. But
can you explain a little bit about the piece downstairs? Because you were telling me a little over dinner about how that piece came out of the time there and how it looks like it might be leading to more sort of art, non-art collaboration projects.
Yeah, well, when we were invited to the show here, since I couldn't bring the Dolphin monument here, I was thinking of ways, you know, I could kind of show this research. And when I was in Galveston, and since I've kind of studied, you know, monuments for gender and sexual minorities all around the world, and there's over like 35 now. So I was kind of reflecting on my experience of realizing this in Galveston and thinking about how the process to, you know, develop these is different for every single place. Not only, you know, where you're going to site them, but also kind of how you get them approved and who you work with and how you make them for the local community and with the community. So the piece downstairs, I was thinking of kind of this place to create an installation where we could kind of rethink about how these work. So I created the Geodesic Dome as kind of like a haven, this kind of like, you know, safe place to think about these in a way, and put the pink triangle in it to reference, you know, the history of the pink triangle. And then there's these videos that I shot, and I kind of pulled a bunch of people together to look at queer rituals and queer ritual space and what that means in terms of the landscape and how bodies are connected. So it's kind of like these windows looking onto Earth from the spaceship. And then the floor piece is, the shape of the carpet is the Aquarius constellation, which is A, my sign, and B, there's some gay mythology within that. And so the glitter drawings are the different monuments from around the world. So those are kind of like the stars on this launching pad. So, yeah.
I was gonna address your question about time, and again, I think it's very meaningful that time is part of the title for the show. But it was a moment where I had this kind of Guy Debordian psychogeography experience down there. Because it was on foot, you really didn't need your car to get from where your two spaces of the day, live, work, and so I would find different ways to meander to the studio and find, really bizarre stores along the way. There's that thrift store, vintage store that was an old brothel that has an old abortion table in there from its previous life before it was a consignment store. And I think about my life now, I don't meander. And I think meandering is really, and drifting, and this idea of a derive is, like, your brain starts to make connections when it's not being productive in a way. Walking inefficiently is a great way to stimulate ideas. And I haven't walked without purpose as much as I did when I was living in Galveston, and I truly miss that.
Yep. One thing I was really aware of with you, Eric, was that you hadn't had a solo show in a while you were building the residency. And last year, you were able to go and do 2 solo shows at Galveston Arts Center and at Devin Borden Gallery. Was there something about getting the GAR up and running that was a necessary part of the healing after the storm? Was there something that made it possible in you to do something new again?
Well, I quit teaching, which was, I was doing a little bit of double duty there for a while, which I was talking about with Kelly earlier. But yeah, I feel like there's something about, like, when the residency was first getting built, I feel like it takes a lot of focus. I feel like, you kind of have to be a little bit, pushing all the time. But I feel like now it feels like it's kind of up and running, and maybe I'm able to, like, be a little more balanced, which is good. I was ready for that, so, but it feels good. But
I got a sense when I asked you about doing the show here that you were like, oh, this might tip the balance again.
Yeah, it might have, but it's good, and like it's like Sally has been a huge help and worked really hard on this, and she's shared a lot of the sort of how we it's obviously it's a lot of work going in the show and all this, but I'm really happy with how the show looks. I think it feels like Galveston a little bit down there, so that was sort of the goal, and we wanted to make a good show, and we wanted it to feel like Galveston, and I personally think we may have done that. So, you guys can go down and look.
Yeah.